Thank you all for joining us today and welcome to our virtual discussion, Leading versus Lagging, How to Prioritize Key Performance Indicators, or KPIs. My name is Nellie Miller, and I'm the Director of Marketing at Empower and Vision. Before we begin our discussion today, I just have a few logistics to share. Please use the chat feature throughout our discussion today. We would love to see a question that maybe you have that your team is thinking about that maybe we can help with, or maybe you have an observation that you'd love to share from your own experiences with KPIs. We would love to see those too. So please feel free to use the chat feature. After today's presentation, you will receive a recording of our discussion, so you can share it with maybe team members who weren't able to join us today, and or maybe rewatch it on demand. And lastly, we have another event in our current series of a culture of strategy execution. So I will share more about that event near the end. So I'm excited to share who's joining us today. I have some wonderful, talented colleagues, and I'm excited to introduce them. The first is Lauren Zerey, our Manager of Strategic Support. Lauren holds both an undergraduate and MBA degree from Rockford University and is a certified auditor of QS quality rating. As our Manager of Strategic Support, she coordinates ideas, strategies, and communication to the actual work being done on a daily basis. This work connects her to almost every aspect of our business at Empower and SupplyCorps, our sister company. A dog lover at heart, she is the person on our team most likely to rescue a dog in need of a loving home. Hi, Lauren.
Hi, Nellie. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well, thanks.
It's great to see you.
Good to see you.
I have to ask, I'm guessing your dog is loving our warmer weather.
She is. She's basking outside.
Wonderful. Awesome. Well, also joining us today is Matt Heggelund, our software product manager. Matt has served as product manager for a variety of technology companies, leading the development and launch of new products as well as enhancements to existing solutions. He helps lead our product development efforts at Empower and Vision, and our clients and team are always excited when Matt has a new feature to release. When he's not using his business talents born from a marketing degree from Coastal Carolina University and an MBA degree from the Keller Graduate School of Management at DeVry University, he's using his golf talents on the links. Hi, Matt.
Hey, Nellie, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am good. Glad to be here.
Great. I have to ask, how's the golf game?
It's could use some warmer weather so I could work on my golf key performance indicators.
Love that. That's great. Okay, hold that thought. Awesome. Also joining us today is our digital marketing team lead, Brittany Ray, who provides amazing technical support as our producer. She's my fabulous marketing colleague in our marketing department, and we thank her for all of her support behind the scenes. So let's get to today's topic. As we progress through the year, we can rely on our strategic plan to determine our goals and objectives. A good strategic plan provides a roadmap for our strategy journey. But how do you assign the appropriate metrics and key performance indicators, otherwise known as KPIs, to measure your progress along the way? And that is the question of the day. So Matt, I'd love to get your take first. As we think about key performance indicators or KPIs, what are they?
Yeah, thanks, Nellie. I think often you might hear some interchangeable names that might be called metrics, milestones, benchmarks, key measures. We call them KPIs. Basically, whatever you call them, if you Google a simple definition of a KPI, you're going to find that it's a quantifiable measure used to evaluate the success of an organization, employee, or team in meeting objectives for performance.
Okay, and obviously, per our title today, there are different types of KPIs. So leading versus lagging, help us understand the difference, and maybe you have an example to share.
Yeah, great question. This is something we often hear when talking with prospects or clients. For me personally, I consider those leading indicators as things you do on the front end of a process to help you work towards kind of long-term success. Basically, just as the name insinuates, a leading indicator is going to lead to results. A lot of times they're difficult to measure, but they're easy to improve on. Whereas those lagging indicators are the output, the end results. They're easy to measure, but can be difficult to see short-term improvements. So if we try to break down a real life common example that's easy to understand, weight loss is probably something most of us struggle with at some point in our lives, and we want to improve on it. And when we think about leading indicators in a weight loss example, we're going to think about what are those things I can control on the front end of losing weight. What are those inputs? And it's going to be, how many calories am I eating on a daily basis? How many calories am I burning? how many times I'm going to the gym, how many miles I'm walking. So those leading indicators are things I can do that are going to help me improve or work towards that end goal of the weight loss, which, when we talk about the lagging indicator in this example, it's going to be number of pounds lost, maybe body mass index. But by setting and following the targets on my leading indicators, I can help reach my lagging indicator target. So almost think about it as a cause and effect relationship where I'm going to do X in order to achieve Y. And if we skip ahead to the next slide, we can take a look at kind of how this breaks down. So across the top there, we're going to look at the example I just kind of talked through, where those leading indicators are going to be things that I can control or measure on a short-term basis. And by doing that, I'm most likely going to achieve my goals for the overall weight. And on the bottom example there, we have one that kind of relates to what Empower relies to there, where maybe I have a net promoter score where I want to improve that score, but it's going to take a long time to improve or see that improvement. So me as a product manager or somebody in our customer success department, what are those things on a weekly basis or monthly basis I can kind of control and work towards? And those are going to be that first response time, average time to resolution, first contact result percentage. And by doing those things and focusing on those things, I know naturally I'll probably improve my NPS.
I'm a visual person, Matt, and I know many people are. So I think seeing it visually and showing the progression and how the leading and lagging work together. And I think your cause and effect statement is really helpful. So thank you for that. And we now have a question for all of you. We're going to ask you to take a poll. And we would love to know, does your organization use more leading or lagging KPIs to inform your work? And the answers are the options: more leading, more lagging, about half and half, or we don't use any KPIs. So we will go ahead and wait as you take the poll, and we'll share the results. Okay, all right, we've got a little bit of everything here. So it looks like 50% of the audience said more lagging, 41% said about half and half, and then it was split. 5% each said more leading or we don't use. So looks like more people, more lagging, and then right behind that is about half and half. So Matt, what's your take on these answers?
Yeah, it's not really surprising looking at those answers. The one thing that I didn't mention, or I don't want people to forget, is KPIs can be leading or lagging. Really just depends on the scenario of who's using the KPI in the audience and kind of what your end goal is for your specific job. So when we talk about that net promoter score example, that's a good leading indicator maybe for our sales team on if it's a higher score, maybe they're more likely to buy from us when their renewal comes up, whereas our customer success team is using NPS as more of a lagging indicator about how their customer feels about their experience with us. So it just kind of all depends on the lens you're looking at on whether it's leading or lagging.
Lauren, what's your take?
Yeah, I kind of echo Matt. It's not a surprising statistic. Organizations should strive to have a healthy balance of leading and lagging KPIs. If you're only looking at the lagging indicators, it could be a little bit more difficult to drive your business forward. No matter what, all of your KPIs should be aligned with your strategy and your objectives.
So it sounds like, Lauren, it's really, there's not a one size fits all approach. It's very specific to your organization, your industry, and really what you're trying to measure.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you to you all for taking our poll. We'll go ahead and move on. But I do want to remind you about the chat feature. So if you have a question or a comment, please go ahead and feel free to share it with us and we can get to those as they come in. So Matt, I'm going to come back to you, and we've discussed leading versus lagging, but there's another way to look at KPIs. And what's that way? How should we look at that?
Yeah, definitely. There's different levels of KPIs. What is important to measure or be aware of changes throughout the levels of an organization or a plan. So we often refer to these levels inside of Empower as global or plan KPIs. So let's take a look back at that weight loss example. So you're working with a doctor. He gives you this plan to lose weight. but ultimately what he is using to measure your improvement is going to be your overall weight. So in his world, that's kind of his global KPI. He's looking at this from a high level. This is the only thing he wants to measure and base your success on. Whereas you, with the personalized kind of plan to lose the weight, have these smaller KPIs that you can measure, like we talked about the calories eaten, the calories burned. You're tracking these, and these are important to you on a daily basis. And as you're working with your doctor, he's going to be looking at that global KPI. And if everything's going well, that's all he needs to do is just look at that KPI. But if things are not going well, then he can dig into you with your plan KPIs. Maybe you're not, getting to the gym enough. Maybe you're not walking enough. So he can kind of identify and work backwards to see where the problem is. So just like that, a doctor could be equated to a executive team or board of directors. So another analogy kind of with global KPIs are they're the compass. They're directing the kind of overall navigational direction of your plan or your organization, where those plan KPIs are more like real-time traffic updates. They're going to alert you for traffic ahead, maybe accidents, detours, or things are going well. Maybe it's new uncharted, maybe some opportunities that you haven't planned for yet on kind of your journey.
I think that's a great analogy. And certainly we like to talk about strategy as a journey. So having that compass and that navigation and the traffic, it all certainly speaks to that journey. So thanks for that example. Lauren, as we really dive into this topic of how to prioritize KPIs, what examples can you share from your world?
Yeah, absolutely. I will echo that was a great example, Matt. I like the compass analogy. But I'll dive into the Supply Core side, our sister company. So at the global level, we have KPIs that are longer view measurements that are tied to our strategy. So an example of that would be our target for revenue per associate. So we have this target value that we need to hit to be successful. At the plan level, we have a more operational lens. So at the operational level, we're looking at our contract metrics. We're required to have a certain percentage of on-time delivery with each contract. So each month we're tracking against that requirement, how we're doing. And are we on track, or are we behind? And do we need to circle the wagon?
So it certainly makes sense, as you and Matt have both explained. Obviously, the global KPI executives leadership are kind of looking at, but that plan KPI is more at the manager director level, regards to operations. So I think that those examples are really helpful as we think about it. But it really comes down to ownership. Obviously, people are looking at the data, but who really owns it? And I read in a wonderful blog, which I will share about in just a minute, that if everyone owns a KPI, then really no one owns it. So how do we approach the topic of ownership, Lauren?
Yep, you're exactly right, Nellie. So if you take a look at the screen right now, we have a lovely screenshot of our software where each KPI has one owner tied to it. So that doesn't mean that there can't be collaborators if there's other people helping work on it, but there is one sole owner who's ultimately responsible for tracking it, reporting on it, alerting others on the team if it's not going according to plan. The management team and the executive teams are also clued in because they're looking at this KPI dashboard on a regular basis as well, so that they can analyze the trends, see how we're doing compared to the target, and then see how we're doing compared to the overall strategy.
So I love that you referred to the screenshot on the slide. We are very proud of our software. It does a wonderful job of tracking KPIs. So great visual, and thanks for explaining it. You mentioned strategy, and that's the name of the game. So how do we connect these KPIs to our strategy?
Yep. So you mentioned before, KPIs aren't going to be the same across organizations or even industries. There's not this one size fits all scenario. So you really need to take a look and determine what is important to measure for your specific organization that's based on your strategy and your objectives. You start off by creating your strategy, and then you develop the KPIs that are going to help you measure against it. But you can't measure everything that moves because you're going to be paralyzed by the amount of data that you're getting back, and it's going to be hard to sort through what is actually truly meaningful for your organization. So measurement in and of itself doesn't really do you any good unless you're able to make it actionable. Looking at trends over time, year over year, and analyzing what that information is telling you makes that actionable. You want to focus in on things that you need to be able to move the needle on to be successful. In the case of KPIs, less is more. You want to be able to kind of zero in your focus on what's really important. KPIs are also going to help you identify issues. So if you look at the screen over here, there's this yellow, there could be an issue. Something's not tracking to plan, it's falling behind. It allows the organization to then do a deeper dive and investigate what's going on, and come up with a plan to resolve it. And on the flip side of that, it's the same way. So if there's KPIs that are going well, that are trending well, you can continue progressing there. An example that I would throw out for a lagging indicator that maybe isn't moving the needle so much is with SupplyCore, a quote turnaround time. So measuring that, it allows us to see historically how quickly we're turning around our quotes. And we can look at trends and we realize there might be an issue if it starts ticking up and up and up, the amount of days that it takes to turn around, but it's always measured looking at the past. But if we were to look at measuring incoming quotes, that and the changes over time there, that's going to lead you to moving the needle up front.
Yeah, some really good examples and points there, Lauren, and I think you ultimately hit right on the head there about the most important thing when thinking about kind of those KPIs and what you're measuring is making sure that they are aligned and connected to a strategy. But what you ultimately define success is going to be different based on your company, your industry, your department, your team, you as an employee, what you're doing, quarter one versus quarter two. Those things are going to change over time, and no matter what the situation is, they should all be aligned and connected to your strategy as it changes over time as well. And to touch on the ownership part, just because you may not own the KPI doesn't mean that KPI doesn't impact or affect you. So in our world, for example, our customer success team owns our NPS score, but me as a product manager, I do have initiatives and objectives that are tied to helping us maintain and improve that NPS over time.
So it's clear from our conversation today that data is data. It's a number on a screen or a piece of paper, but it's really what story does it tell? And so, Lauren, connecting back to our software, not only are we having the KPIs reflect throughout the strategy in the software, but there's also progress notes that can be put in to give context to the data. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yep. So you can kind of tell the story of what happened in between the time periods that you're measuring.
Exactly. So that's really an important piece. And we use it a lot at our own companies, and our clients love it as well. So we have another poll question for all of you that we would love to share. And this time, we've certainly kind of talked about KPIs, the differences and sort of lagging, leading, plan versus global. So after hearing all this conversation, we would love to know, do you feel your KPIs are helping drive your strategy? Yes or no? And we'll go ahead and wait as you all take it. Okay, looks like 67% of our audience said yes, they feel their KPIs are helping drive strategy, and 33% said no. Lauren, what's your take on these results?
Yeah, I'm a little surprised that we had that high of a number saying yes, but I'm happy for those that did. KPIs are difficult to nail down to the handful of measurements that are really important and relevant for driving your strategy forward. Again, less is more to ensure that there's not too much noise with the amount of data that everyone is looking at. Just remember, by starting with defining your strategy and then determining your KPIs.
Matt, what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little surprising that the number's that high, but it's not a set and forget it process. You definitely want to make sure you're taking a deeper dive into what you're measuring, make sure it's accurate and really defining and setting you up for success. I think a good example is revenue, and there's multiple ways or variations to measure revenue where, let's say we're measuring the number of accounts that we lost last month and we only lost 2 accounts. Sounds really good, right? But when you look at it, those 2 accounts were 20% of our overall revenue. So when I looked, at the 20%, that's telling a much different story than only losing 2 accounts. So just make sure you're continually monitoring. Internally here, we have a meeting every Monday called Metric Monday, where we are constantly reviewing, going through global plan KPIs, and really digging into the data and making sure that we're reviewing, analyzing, and taking action on the data and really using it to inform our decisions.
You mentioned the Metric Monday meeting. I know we all enjoy it because, again, we are kind of owning different data sets and looking at our own data. So it's great to have that conversation across our team and understand kind of the data that they're looking at and tracking for sure. So I want to remind you about the chat if you have any questions, but we'll go ahead and move on. I have a few more things to share as we progress through our conversation today. You've heard us talk about our software. We're very proud of it. You've seen some screenshots today in the slides, but we make strategy execution software, and Matt is certainly very close to the development of it, and we get to all benefit from using it. But really, the software helps us help other people and their organizations achieve their strategic goals and strategic plans. And we also have critical strategy consulting services to help with the software and everyone's strategic journey. Our software and services help create transparency, alignment, and visibility around the strategy and its execution. And so our goal is to help all of you create a culture of strategy execution. And so today we want to share an opportunity that we would love for you to take us up on, a KPI lunch and learn. We've talked about KPIs, but we know, again, they're very specific to your organization and your industry. And so Brittany has just put into the chat the link to get to this page that we're showing here on the slide. But we would love to buy you lunch, buy you and your team lunch, and dive a little bit deeper into your organization and the specific KPIs that you maybe have questions about or maybe have some challenges with. So we will also follow up after today's presentation with the link in an email, so you can also share it with team members. And again, we're happy to buy you lunch and have a great conversation about KPIs. Speaking of resources, we have a lot on our website, so I encourage you to visit empower.com. We have templates and blogs, and I alluded to a blog earlier. Matt has written a blog about KPIs, and it's a great summary of today's conversation, as well as includes a few other points that we didn't get to, but I encourage you to take a look at that. And Lauren has also authored a wonderful blog that really touches on when is it time to hit the refresh button for your strategy. We know that's really helped a lot of our clients as they think about their strategies, and when things kind of the world changes, maybe it's time to hit that refresh button. In addition, I mentioned another event. Our Culture of Strategy Execution series continues this month with a coffee chat on April 28th. And there we'll talk about stakeholder value versus shareholder value, the differences between those and who cares about them and why you should. So we look forward to a great conversation. Bring your favorite coffee, tea, other beverage, and we look forward to that conversation. As we end today's presentation, we like to kind of leave you with a question. And we've talked a lot about KPIs, the story they can tell. And Matt brought up an example of, maybe you've lost 2 customers, but on the one hand, it's just 2, but then, oh my goodness, it was 20% of your organization's revenue. So there's that kind of false positive there when you're looking at that data. So you can choose different data points that may reflect a false positive. So we ask all of you, as you go back to your days today, how do you know you're getting the right information from the data you're measuring? Lots of great question to think about. So we would love to help you as you explore that conversation. So again, we look forward, if we can help with the lunch and learn about KPIs, we'd love to do so. On that note, I just want to say thank you to many people. First of all, thank you, Brittany, for all of your work behind the scenes as usual. Thank you, Matt. I know it's time the sun's shining and maybe you can get some golf in later today, but thank you for being here today and helping us think through KPIs.
Yeah, my pleasure to cover the topic. We could probably spend hours and days covering this and trying to get it right. So it's a beautiful thing, the KPIs of what you can do and be flexible and how you define it and what kind of lens you look at. So just super glad to be here and glad to see you guys.
And it looks like, before Brittany, I have just a message before we end. It looks like we may have a question. And Brittany, I would love to hear from that question before we end.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, guys. We do have a few questions here.
Oh, great.
The first one is from Spitty. He says, can you please say more about outputs versus outcomes?
Okay. Well, Matt, I was just turning it over to you. So what's your take on that question? Outcomes versus output. Can you repeat it again, Brittany?
Yeah, just wanting more about outputs versus outcomes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think at least the way I'm understanding it, and the way I would look at it is your outcomes are going to be your target state. Like, where do you physically or visually see this thing being when you're done? Um, Whereas the outcome, or sorry, the output is more the measurement. Like, how am I going to measure that this outcome is successful? So the outcome might be more qualitative, subjective, if you will, of how you're going to see something or feel something happen, or how it's going to be visualized. Whereas those outputs are going to be something that you can or like a non-objectively measure against those and have some specific targets to define whether or not you've reached success. I don't know what Lauren has to add on that either.
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head. Making sure that that target state is well defined so that you know what is important to be measuring with the outputs is important as well.
Thank you for that. And it looks like I am now able to see the Q&A. So thank you for those that have used it. Stacy has asked, leading have taken more time to think through and develop. So the leading KPIs have taken more time to think through. How do we frame it as important and even vital? Is it worth the work required? So Lauren, again, leading is a little bit more of a tougher conversation, but is it worth the effort to really nail those down?
Yeah, I think of it like a forecast almost because, you're not going to know what the future holds exactly, but it is important to think about the different scenarios and outcomes. And it is tied to your strategy. So in order to be moving your strategy forward, you have to be thinking about the future.
Yeah, and I would interject and totally agree with that, that it's worth those time and investment in meetings and figuring out what those leading measures should be. It's almost like a marathon trainer, right? Like, you just can't go out and run a marathon. So if you're only thinking about the 26 some miles, which I would never ever run a marathon, but if you're thinking about that from the start, it's overwhelming. You're just kind of like paralyzed by, how am I ever going to run 26 miles? But if you then break it down into smaller chunks where you can train and do those small little milestones. So I think the more that you work backwards from your end target and break it into those smaller measures and targets, I think you'll end up finding more success than if you do nothing at all, or don't invest the time into figuring out what those leading indicators would be.
Richard has asked a question. How do we approach the topic in tracking qualitative KPIs versus quantitative KPIs? Matt, I'll start with you.
No, it's a good question. There's always going to be things that are going to be difficult to measure. Ultimately, there should be a good mix, and with our software platform, it kind of allows for that mix of qualitative and quantitative measures. And oftentimes, and I think we've heard more recently, that people are defining what that kind of global or larger set long-term KPI is going to be, and then giving people in their departments or teams the flexibility to define what are those action items, what are the things that I know I need to do that is going to be hard to measure, but I know I need to do it in order to help measure or help reach those targets. So I think it's a good mix. And with Envision, the software allows those action items, those subjective measures that I feel like this thing is going really good, so it's green, or I feel like this thing's going off the rails, it's red. So it's a good question, and Lauren might have some input on that too.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head too. It's the ability in Envision to color code how you think things are going, is really kind of how you're going to say, this is what I think about this quantitative measure. You saw in the KPI graph too, that's also color coded. So it's really simple to see this is going well or this isn't going well.
And I think, that's one of the great things about our software, the progress notes, which really allow you to have that context, as we mentioned before, and give that more detail to give context to the story about the data points that you're looking in the KPIs and certainly the health indicators. It's a very visual experience, which is also very cool as you're kind of looking through strategy and understanding where your organization is. Well, thank you very much to you both for answering those questions. And thank you to Spitty, Stacy, and Richard for your questions. We really do appreciate them. And thank you, Brittany, for bringing them to my attention. I will go back and say thank you again, Matt. We really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome anytime.
And thank you, Lauren, so much. It was great to see you and hear your perspectives as you work with strategy each and every day.
Yeah, great to see you as well. Thank you.
And I want to thank all of you for joining us. Thank you so much. We always have a great time sharing our perspectives and the experiences we have at our own companies and also with our clients. So again, we would love to take this conversation offline and share more about KPIs. So we would look forward to that, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.